Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Insta360 Institute. This is our second webinar in our brand new series. We're excited to have you here today. We have some very special guests that we'll get to in a second, and you could probably see them on the call right now. The goal of this webinar is to do a couple of different things. First, we're going to demystify the art of professional 360 capture. We're then going to give you a solid foundation and build your skill level so that you can see that it's really not that hard to go out and create great quality 360 VR content. And then, as with any craft, we're going to show you some tips and industry secrets that will level you up from the start. And we have some really great folks here today. Mark and Jenna Lambert are here from VR Artisans. And Mark, Jenna, are you guys on? You want to say a quick hello?
Hello, everyone.
So we're very lucky to have these folks here today. Mark has decades of background in the production space. He's filmed all over the world. He comes from a traditional background, and he's since transitioned into VR and immersive storytelling. Mark's worked on countless large projects in the traditional space. I'll let him talk more about it, but he's head up VFX supervising. He's done DFX and CG on some of the leading film projects. And Jenna is an experienced VR DP and has a ton of experience using the Insta360 line of professional cameras. And Jenna is going to jump on to give you guys some tips and tricks and some of the things that she values most about Insta360 cameras. And I'm, of course, I'm Michael Shaboon, and I'm the VP of Marketing at Insta360. And I'm excited to be leading this session for you all today. I hope it's valuable, and I hope there's some returning folks from last time we did this. So here's what we're going to talk about today. It's a pretty straightforward agenda. We have a lot of information, and I'm going to try to move as quickly as possible through some of this stuff. We do have a Q&A at the end, so if you submitted a question in advance of this webinar, we're looking at some of those, and we're going to try to answer as many as we can. If we don't get to your question, we'll try to answer it at some point in the presentation, or you can always email us after or on our communities. So here's a look at our agenda for today. It's going to start with a very basic intro to Insta360. For anybody that joined last time, these slides are similar, but I think it's important for anybody that's new coming on to learn about Insta360 and why we're different and how we're doing things differently. So we'll start there, and then we're going to progress. We'll show a couple of high quality 360 photo and video examples. We'll talk about how to pick the right camera for your VR project. And then we'll show the whole ecosystem of other products that you need to help with your capture and in post later. And then we'll talk about a couple of pro tips that'll save you a lot of time throughout the whole process. We'll meet Mark and Jenna, and we'll get some introductions from them and some tips and secrets from them. We'll talk about post-production and the type of viewing devices that you can use for displaying your content after you've shot and edited it. And then we'll finish with a couple of other examples of ways you can make money off of a 360 camera professionally, and a general Q&A. You guys have submitted some really wonderful questions, and we're going to try to get through as many of them as we can. For those that we don't get through, I apologize this time. We'll try to answer you in our community and our forums. And for everybody in attendance right now, we're asking you to please stay till the end of the webinar. We're going to have a very unique offer that we didn't offer last time, and so it'll be available to a select few people, first come first serve. Please stay to the end, and we'll share it with you then. So this slide to me is always the most interesting because it really hits the foundation home for what VR production used to be. And if anybody has been in this space for a couple of years, you know that it really used to be a disaster. You used to have to slap together a bunch of different cameras, and you had to sync them all together. And so before you actually got to shoot, you had to go through this whole laundry list of technical feats that you had to put into place. And also, please keep in mind that everything that we're going to show you today is meant to both reduce the amount of time in your workflow, and it's meant to show you how to really finesse each step of the way from production, post to delivery. So who is Insta360? We are the #1 camera 360 camera company in the world. We have a whole line of products ranging from tiny little wearable single lens cameras all the way through to professional and cinematic VR cameras. And where we started was, of course, with 360 cameras, but we've since branched out into also making single fixed angle cameras, single lens. And the main focus of today's presentation is going to be on the Pro 2 and the Titan. Let me just hide these two cameras here. So I mentioned Insta360 being the #1 360 camera company in the world. We're sold in over 158 countries, and the reason for this tremendous growth over the last few years is because we really find the right intersection between powerful products, affordable entry-level cost price point, and easy to use and powerful systems. And the one thing to note is over 60% of our team are engineers and R&D focused on continuously making the products better, coming up with new features, coming up with new products. That's what we're all about. You can see that Insta360 is always innovating and always putting out new products. We have offices all around the world in Shenzhen, Tokyo, and Los Angeles. So we're very much immersed in bi-coastal culture, and we try to stay on top of the latest trends. Okay, here is a sampling of what's possible with your Pro cameras. I just want to show you a couple of examples up front, just so you can kind of get an idea of what the footage looks like compared to a normal camera. But we'll talk about more features as we go out through the presentation. You'll see, again, that the quality is more on par with traditional cameras these days than it's ever been before. And I think this is one of the big reasons why VR is has been gaining popularity in recent years. This is a regular HDR photo. So you can see that it was shot, this is a single shot, and it was shot at multiple exposure stops because our professional cameras can do HDR. We'll get more into all of these features later, but you can just see the difference between a normal photo and an HDR photo. This is much more vibrant. It shows the highlights and the low lights much better. Show you that one more time. This is a standard video. Again, it was shot with a fixed camera, and then all you do in post is you pan the camera around, and you see the video quality is it's comparable to traditional cinema and DSLR cameras. The quality is much higher these days, and this is why these camera systems are so popular. Here's an example of a motion shot. Now, this is amazing because you now have gyroscopes, really powerful 9-axis gyroscopes that are built directly into our Pro 2 and Titan cameras. And what we like to say is no gimbal needed. So what you can essentially do is you can hold the camera, it'll stabilize once at the capture level, and then it'll stabilize again in post. And we'll show you that once we get a little bit further down this presentation. But it's quite remarkable, the technology that it's come a long way. And here's another example of a cool feature that you can do in the app. So a time-lapse video, I know this is a pretty standard feature for a traditional camera. We've now implemented this feature in a professional 360 camera, so you can get things like this at the click of a button. And there's not really much work that has to go into it other than setting up your camera, dialing in your settings, and clicking record and hiding from the shot. I did want to mention this. So you saw in a former slide that we do have a line of consumer cameras. Now, the 1R is a really amazing entry-level VR camera. Of course, it has modular lenses. So if you don't want to shoot VR, you could just shoot regular, like a traditional action camera, or you can swap in and put on our 1-inch sensor. But the idea with this is, at the end of the day, I would always recommend starting, if you're delivering professional content, to start with a professional camera. But if you just want to get your feet wet and you want to see what the technology is like and you want to just plug some content into a headset, I always recommend getting at least one consumer grade 360 camera It's also good to have alongside with a pro camera so you can do spec work or scouting or anything that requires a much quicker delivery. And here's our entry level professional camera. This is the Pro 2. So what you can do with this camera is remarkable. So the way I like to talk about this is in terms of what you could do in the past. So a couple of the features here, and let me just switch to my spotlight tool. So with this camera, you have Farsight live monitoring. This is the world's first live monitoring system, long range wireless monitoring system for a 360 camera. We've had things like Teradek and other live monitoring systems for traditional cameras, but now we're trying to essentially create a similar user experience from our cameras that you would get with a normal camera. So we have this now. We have flow state stabilization, which will give you gimbal-like stabilization, the ability to capture up to 8K in stereoscopic or 3D. You can shoot HDR photos and videos. You can do you can live stream in 360 without additional gear required. The camera does all of the stitching in camera at 4K. We have an 8K player, and so you can load your 8K content into a headset, spherical audio, and no stitch editing. A combination of all of these things condenses the workflow to a point where folks without traditional VR backgrounds could now pick up this camera and use it. It's that easy. And here's our cinematic solution. So Titan and Pro 2 essentially function the same way, but when it comes to the features, Titan has larger camera sensors. It has 8 micro four thirds sensors, and what this will do is enable you to shoot much better in low light. You can shoot higher resolution up to 11K with the Titan. So anything that requires the highest resolution deliverable, the best color depth, the best bit rate, I would go with Titan. You can shoot up, you can export up to 180 megabits per second per camera on the Titan, and you can also shoot in 10-bit color. So for any of you folks out there who are in the VFX space, who are colorists, you might appreciate this. And I think Mark can talk about some of this when he jumps on the call with us in a couple of minutes. Now, you can shoot with Pro 2 right out of the box. It's no problem at all, but there will be some additional components that you'll need to make it work. And I'll show you a couple of them here in a second. The first thing, and this is probably one of the most important questions that comes up on a daily basis from end users is, hey, which memory do I use? It may seem like a trivial question, but it's actually really important that you use the storage that's been recommended by us in order for optimal performance. For the Pro 2, the Pro 2 takes 7 total cards. So it's 1 full-size SD card and 6 micro SD cards. And you need to make sure that you use the Extreme Pro SanDisk versions. Make sure it says Extreme Pro and it has V30 on it. It's super important. And for Titan, it's 9 full-size SD cards that are also of the Extreme Pro. Now, I use, you can use the 64 gig cards. Personally, I use 128 gigabytes. With 64, you'll get about an hour of 8K footage on the Pro 2 or about 40 minutes of 11K footage on the Titan. So with that in mind, just plan accordingly. A lot of folks will have a few different sets of cards, and just make sure that you label them so that when you put them into the right slot, that all of the data remains the same. The next thing that you'll absolutely need, and you know, I always carry one of these around with me in any instance, is a good VR tripod. Now, there's a difference between a VR tripod and a traditional tripod that you might use for your stills camera or your regular fixed angle DSLR. The key difference is just form factor, right? So what you want to do is save yourself as much time as possible every step of the way. On the left here, if you're using this traditional tripod, most likely the handle is going to appear in the shot. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but in post, that's just going to add time for what you need to do. So what we recommend, and this is the tripod that I use most of the time, is a VR tripod that has a monopod coming off the top and a low base that won't really appear in the shot. Now, the legs still might appear in the shot, but there's things you can do like adding a logo to the bottom or the nadir where people look down. So there's tricks that you can utilize in order to delete the tripod. There's also softwares that automate a lot of this now, so it's not a huge deal. Another really popular question that comes up is power supply. Again, super trivial. The camera, there's a lot of different ways to power it, and the most common options are either to use the battery that the camera comes with, or to use an external battery solution for whatever case, whether you need longer battery life or you're plugging in directly to other film equipment. But you have the option now. And for external power, we recommend a V-mount battery. And for the Pro 2, you'll need 12 volts or 5 amps. And for the Titan, you'll need slightly more at 14.5 volts or 7 amps. And these are basic battery kits that you can buy at most traditional suppliers for this type of film equipment. It's also worth noting that you don't even need a battery inside of the camera. You can just plug it into its charging port and power it through house power. So you have a lot of options here. The next slide talks about external audio ports. So obviously, if you're shooting for VR, audio is going to be really important. And I think Mark can also talk about how he records his audio. There are two USB audio ports on the camera. So there's a USB on top, and there's a 3.5 millimeter jack on top and bottom. So depending on what your audio solution is, you have flexibility of either connecting it to the top of the camera or to the bottom. There's also a convenient 3.5 millimeter, a quarter 20 on the top of the camera, and any quarter 20 accessory you can just stick right on top of there. So typically I always mount my mic on the top of the camera. And these are some of the recommended external audio equipment that we use. Now, let me just preface by saying the Pro 2, the Pro 1, the Pro 2, and the Titan, they all have the ability to record audio in camera. But the challenge can often be with a powerful VR camera, it does have fans that spin. So sometimes those fans can interfere with the sound and muffle it up. And so if one trick is if you're shooting for 15 minutes or less on the Pro 2, then you can actually turn the fans off and get usable audio. There are 4 mics built into the Pro 2, so you can use those 4 mics to record full ambisonic sound. Now, obviously, there are companies like Zoom who are dedicated to creating an elite audio solution. So I would pretty much always recommend getting an external mic. This Zoom H3 VR in the middle here, this is the one that I use. It's $299. It's not that expensive, and you get some really phenomenal audio quality. It comes with this nice quarter 20 to quarter 20 screw. So you put one in the bottom of the Zoom mic, and then you screw it directly onto the top of our camera. Of course, other Zoom solutions as well work with our camera. These are just the most popular recommended ones, and you can use solutions from other companies like Sennheiser as well. So we talked about live monitoring when I was introducing the features. This is pretty much what it looks like. So you get a transmitter and you get a receiver. The receiver is connected to your mobile device, and the transmitter is connected to your camera via Ethernet cable. So all you do is you rig the transmitter up on your camera. There's a nice little clip that you can attach it on your tripod that comes in the kit with the camera, and then you pop your phone or your tablet into the receiver, and you connect it. Now, for connecting it, we won't go into the instructions. There are detailed instructions on how to do it on our website. So if you go to www.insta360.com, you should see a full user guide that will support all of this. But as far as resolution, you're going to get 1080p real-time playback, and you're going to get that playback up to 300 meters ground to ground. Now, if there are objects in the way, if you're going through a wall, if you're upstairs and the camera's downstairs, whatever is interfering with your camera, it will reduce the range by a bit. But in terms of what was around before this, there wasn't any live monitoring. Cameras could you could connect to the camera's Wi-Fi. You could get about 20 feet or so of live preview, but if you're going past that, then you're basically shooting in the dark. So this is a huge game changer for the VR industry. Now I'd love to give you some general pro tips, in particular when it comes to stitching. Stitching is a common challenge for posts that we hear about from users across the board. So we felt that it was important to at least spend some time talking about it. There are some things to look out to while filming that will save you a lot of time later in post. The first one is safety distance for stitching. So stitching is a big thing for 360 cameras. So every time you have multiple cameras all working together, you're going to have some overlap in the cameras, and you're going to need some software to combine all of those camera sensors together. So what we recommend is, and obviously if you're super close to the camera, and this is a general rule of thumb across the board for all 360 cameras, stitching is going to be harder to do. If you're further away, it's going to be easier to do. We're recommending the basic distance from the subject to the camera be about 1 meter on the Pro 2 and about 1.5 meters on the Titan. Now, if your subject does go closer than that, it's not a huge problem. There are great tools that you can use to correct your stitching for proximity, and we'll show you some of those later down. But the most popular one that we like is Mystica, and we have a great partnership with them, and you can get some really custom stitch templates that you can use for your work. And the second thing to go along with that is object placement. So you can see that each of the cameras covers an equal amount of distance. And you never want to be in that stitch line, because if you're in the stitch line, it's going to be pretty obvious, and it's going to create a lot more work for you in post. So whenever you're planning your shots, a general rule of thumb is just don't put your subject in the stitch line, and you should be fine. So here's what it looks like when you're using Farsight to live monitor. Again, there's so many advantages here. You can see what's going on without being in the shot. It is the most important thing. And being in your own shot would essentially cost you an arm and a leg to erase later in post, or you just wouldn't be able to use that portion of the content. Now, we've seen some creative ways in the past to hide from your shot. I have a director friend who used to bury himself in the ground just to be able to see what the camera was seeing. Or I had another friend who would hide inside of a trash can. So the creativity's there, but it's unnecessary. And now with Farsight, you don't have to deal with the headache of figuring out where your whole crew is going to stand or hide. It's that much easier at the production level. The next thing to be on the lookout for is complicated patterns. So the examples that you're seeing here, like fences or these types of mesh patterns, these may complicate the stitching process, specifically if they're at the zenith or the nadir, so all the way up top or all the way on the bottom. Our upfront, the recommendation is just to try to avoid them, and if not, there are solutions in place that will help optimize the experience. So what you can see here in our stitching software is there's a zenith optimization button. This is just a one-click button. You just click it once and the software will know what to optimize automatically. For the nadir on the bottom, you can actually, I mentioned this before, but you can add a custom logo. This has been really popular lately for documentaries or other filmmakers or even educational series to just drop their logo in on the bottom. And you can automate that all with our software as well. So now I want to, I touched on this a little bit, that you have some customization, and here's a great picture of Mark in the field using the Titan for one of his epic jobs, and he's going to share all this info with us shortly. But the first thing that I want to show you all is, to me, this is amazing, because you can use our professional grade 360 cameras just like you would a normal camera. So any of you traditional camera users out there, whoever owns a DSLR, you're going to see, when you see the setting and you pull it up in the Pro 2, now this is a screenshot directly from the mobile app interface. The desktop interface looks similar, except it's stretched out and it's formatted for desktop. But here you can shoot in auto settings, you can shoot in manual settings. You can see on the bottom here, So here you're going to see that you can change your ISO, and there's a slider. You can go from one up to pretty high ISO. You can change your shutter manually, white balance. You even have the ability to do a live curves option here, so you can really finesse and make sure that you're shooting the best quality content. And you can shoot an ISO or a high shutter priority mode. So the point is that there's a lot of customization that you can do. It's not just you get what you get. With a lot of fixed setting cameras, uh, there's been a lot of professionals that complain about them. Yeah, the auto looks great, but I can't do anything with it beyond just what the camera is set to. And a couple of tips that we're going to offer you here. So for still photos, I always try to keep the ISO as low as possible. It creates a cleaner image with less noise. I think this is pretty much the same for traditional photography. For shooting video, higher shutter speeds are better for reducing the jello effect as well. And the key to the best 360 video image quality is really to find that balance between ISO and shutter speed. So again, these tips are nothing new that you haven't already learned from shooting with a traditional camera. The next really cool feature that I want to talk about is auto exposure bracketing. So I imagine anybody who's in the VFX space or that world just kind of perked up in their seat, because this is a pretty feature. Now, we've seen a huge demand in the VFX space for 360 cameras purely because it saves you time in the field. You don't have to go out and take a separate image of 9 different locations or 9 different shots and then combine them together. When you're on set, you just don't have a lot of time to waste in general. So this is a really great tool that we're seeing more and more. And with auto exposure bracketing, you can decide how many shots you take at different exposure stops. So you can take 3 photos, 5 photos, 7, or 9, and you can customize your exposure. So if you wanted to go from -1 to 1 at every exposure stop along the way, you can do that. And really, we recommend this when there's a lot of light fluctuation. So when there's super bright lights and there's shadows, we like to use HDR photos for that. And I think also Mark can talk a little bit about this because he has a ton of experience with these types of imagery. This is an example. On the left, you're going to see an auto exposure. On the right, in the middle, on the right, this is customized. So we decided to take 7 exposure shots and 9 shots and combine them all together. Now, does more exposure stops necessarily mean the best possible image? Not always. It really depends on the environment. So I would say, and you can see here that auto doesn't necessarily look the best. 7 might be kind of the sweet spot. You could probably even try 5. So more is not always better. Here's a sample of a nice HDR shot that we really like, and this uses 7 shots combined into one. Now here's the really cool thing. The camera has some powerful processing in it. So you can either do the stitching on your computer at home, or if you just want quick shots, you can do some of the stitching directly in the camera. Now, it'll take a little bit longer, but if you're on the road and you don't have your computer with you, this could be a pretty convenient feature to have access to. Now, camera movement is probably one of the most important things when it comes to producing professional VR content. And if you have shaky footage and people are viewing it in a VR headset, there's a strong chance that they're going to get nauseous really quick. So we've put together the next few slides to kind of help alleviate some of those challenges. And it's not just poor stabilization that leads to a poor viewing experience. There's other factors at play that you need to consider. There's poor quality of the footage, right? If the footage doesn't feel realistic enough, then the experience isn't going to feel realistic enough, so people aren't going to like it as much. In general, watching a VR experience, you can't do it for as long as you would watch a traditional video. So you need to think about what to pack into a shorter form factor. And there's other things at play. And so these things you should all take into consideration strongly as you're thinking about creating your content and which type of footage to film. Here's an example of the difference between flow state stabilization on and flow state off. This is inside of a shopping mall. I really like this shot because you're seeing a lot of different exposures. You're seeing highlights down here in the ground. You're seeing low lights over here in the ceiling. So not only is this a good example of stabilization, but this is a really great example of high dynamic range on a camera. And you can see that the person's head is down below here. So this is really just somebody walking with the camera. It's not on a dolly. It's not on an RC car. So in addition to stabilizing at the X and Y axes, it's also stabilizing at the Z axis. Now, there's things that you can do to avoid these types of stabilization interferences when you're filming. So if you're walking, you could do simple things like take small steps or walk with your knees bent to avoid a big bounce. And for users who are mounting to RC cars or dollies, just figure out what kind of wheels you should use based on the terrain that you're going on. So just identify your location and what's going to work best. And then for a lot of folks who are mounting to cars or helicopters or drones, you might be noticing that there's high frequency vibrations in some of your shots. For that, we just simply recommend using an absorption plate, and it should get rid of those vibrations pretty simply for you. The next thing we're going to recommend is frame rate. So a lot of you who come from traditional filmmaking backgrounds, you might want to shoot everything in 24 frames naturally because that's more of the film industry standard deliverable. But in our case, we've seen a lot of the content actually being shot at 30 frames per second for VR videos. But even 30 frames isn't ideal. What we're actually recommending is shooting something anywhere in between 50 or 60 frames per second. And you can see on the example that it's a smoother and overall better quality experience, especially when you're in a headset. And I won't get into all the frame rate capabilities here, but you can see that we've listed it here, that there's all these possibilities for you in terms of resolutions and frame rates with the Pro 2 and the Titan. So of course, we also want to talk about post-production. We talked about how we've made simple tools for production at the capture level, and now I'd like to show you how we're optimizing things at the post level. So Insta360 supports and works well with a variety of third-party softwares. Specifically, we have a really great integration with Adobe Premiere Pro, and we've come out with a no-stitch editing plugin. So what you can do is you can take your unstitched spherical files, you can bring them directly into Premiere Pro, and you can edit and only stitch out the final portion of footage that you care about. So for people like me, I usually overshoot. I have a ton of VR content that I need to stitch. This is about an 80% reduction in post for me. So and beyond that, we also work with a number of these other third parties. Now, if there's something that we if there's users out there who are using a third-party software and we're not well integrated with it, please reach out and let us know. We're always looking to add more throughputs and easy ways of editing for our end users. And you can see here, so everything that we're doing at the post-production level is meant to cut down the amount of time that you spend editing your footage and having to go back and make changes. So in the past, something like this that I'm showing you here is never possible. This is a live preview box for what the final stitched video or photo would look like inside of our stitcher. So what you get, these are the origin files. They're spherical. So you'll take 6 spherical or 8 spherical files and you'll stitch them together into one rectilinear image. You can live preview and you can also adjust color before you export. So this will save you time as well. Of course. So as with any software, we have a recommended spec for what your computer should be running in order to properly stitch these files. Now, this is not a mandate. Now, I've seen footage stitched, 8K footage stitched on a MacBook Air, it could take a little while longer than a computer with these specs, but it's still possible. I personally have a MacBook Pro 2017, and it's not the ideal machine for it, but it gets the job done still. So if you are considering getting a Pro 2, on the left, here's our recommendation for what I think should go, or what we think should go into it. You should have at least an i7 processor with 6700K or higher performance, at least 8 gigs of memory. You want the graphics card requirement is fairly low. You want at least an NVIDIA GTX 980 or similar AMD card. An SSD is recommended, but you can go with a regular non-solid state drive, and you want at least Windows 8 or an equal Apple iOS OS operating system to run it. For Titan, the requirements are slightly higher, so it's also an i7 but 8700K. You want to double up on your memory and get about 1600. The recommended graphics card is an NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti, which is one of the newer graphics cards that they've made over the last year or so. It's not going to break the bank, but it's a great, and it's a nice, powerful GPU. Also, same specs for hard disk and operating system. So once you stitch your footage, how do you play it back? And a lot of you might be thinking, well, I have a computer with a 4K screen. How am I going to play 8K content back on it? Or my Oculus Go only plays 5.8K or 6K content. How do I put my 8K video on there? And is it redundant that I've shot a video in 8K? Well, we've thought about that, and the general kind of piece of feedback is that the headsets and the viewing devices are always lagging behind the camera technology. This has been a challenge for us, especially the last couple of years in the industry. So what we did was Insta360 engineers wrote a player, created a player called Crystal View. And Crystal View is compatible with headsets like Oculus Go, Samsung Gear VR, iOS, and various Android models. And once you install our app onto your device, you can actually load, let's say you're using a Samsung Galaxy S10 phone that has a 4K display. You can bring your 11K video or your 8K video directly into our app. It'll convert it into an H.265 file, and it will actually allow you to play back a higher quality video, and it'll look nicer than if you're exporting just a 4K or a 6K video. If you want more information about this, there's some great info on our website that you can look at. There's some great videos and tips that we have that talks all about Crystal View and the technology. Now, if you want to convert something to Crystal View, let me just go back to my Stitcher slide. You would open up your file, your final exported file. You would click this Crystal View converter button. You would select the platform that you're converting it to, and our Stitcher does the rest. So you're not required to do any of the heavy lifting at all. This is all conversions that are done in our software. So now I'd love to get to the more exciting part of our webinar, and I'd love to invite Mark back in and Jenna. And I'd love them to share a couple of their slides on how they've been using the Titan out in the field, and maybe spill some secrets to you guys that they've learned. Mark, Jenna, are you guys there?
Yeah, I'm back with you here. Let's see if we can figure out this screen sharing here. And I click on that, and you can see my screen.
Oh yeah.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so glad to be here. The company that I have is called VRtisans. We have been filming around the world for quite a few years. A little bit about my background first. I come from the feature film world, so all of these various projects, 14 different feature films, and got out of that in about 10 years ago, and decided to go into the VR world back in 2015, And since that time, we have filmed in over 25 countries now. Some amazing projects that we've had the opportunity to become involved with. So let me load up a quick video. So we've had the chance to go around and do conservation videos, a lot of filming in Africa and overseas, a lot of travel videos, history videos. This is a Civil War piece that I did for PBS. A piece that I did last year on the mind of a teenage shooter, very dark, but it's used for school resource officers to explain various issues and symptoms, treatments. Also working on a series called The Good Road VR. It's coming out on PBS now, and we're hoping to create a VR version of that. So we went to Bangkok, over to Thailand, over to Myanmar. We're telling stories about basically people that are local and doing amazing things in their local communities. And as probably most people on this this call know, VR is definitely an empathy machine, and it's amazing when you can drop into these places and tell these stories about all of the people that we get to cover. So we're doing a variety of different projects. We are also doing room scale VR. And the interesting thing is, now this is a museum demo. I don't have a demo where we mix, but there are opportunities to actually do these type of projects and mix in 360 video. So that you can have something where you're walking around this room, and here we're picking up Fabergé eggs. Excuse me. Here we're picking up Fabergé eggs, but you could also be picking up a 360 video glowing sphere in our other demos, and then that 360 video comes up around you. So we're actually mixing all of those. So quite a few projects over the last few years, everything from location-based projects to things with PBS. We're working with AARP, a number of different people. Our last big trip, or our last big project, was last fall. We went from coast to coast, and we literally filmed off of the front of a car with a Titan, going from Virginia Beach to California. And it's pretty amazing. In the actual experience, you feel like you're inside of a convertible. And there you can see one of those vibration dampeners that we were talking about earlier. It is critical, even though the Titan's amazing and it has the flow state and things, you still, there's so much vibration on a car mount, on a drone mount, anything that is that mechanical and not highly dampened. You need to add additional dampening. So you can see that underneath the sort of red wheels that are under the Titan there. It's a special dampener. If you are doing car mounts, either my recommendation is either to hire a professional rigger or know what you're doing. I happen to know, having worked in the industry for a long time, how to actually build one of these. But you can see it's a rather complex process. What we do, top mounted car mounts or car mounts on the hood, they're simpler, but you still want to have really good large 6-inch suction cups, or be building a custom frame. The bottom mounts on this one, for instance, are actually not suction cups. They're actually bolted into the bottom of the frame of this car. So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to toss it over to Jenna here. And Jenna is our director of photography at vArtisans, been working with us for about 3 years now. And Jenna, if you want to hop on and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go to your slides.
Thanks so much, guys. Anyways, thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having us here. I'm Jenna. I'm the DP, the VR DP over at vArtisans. My job is to make sure that visually we at vArtisans are seeing what we want you to see, and that the camera placement is exactly where it needs to go. It's a little bit different, I think, from what I've discovered, it's a little bit different from traditional filmmaking in that it's much more experiential in terms of where the camera is and all of those things. I really, really enjoyed my time working with the artisans. As you can see, there's a photo of me having a very zen moment with the camera over at the Grand Canyon. It's been super, super exciting. But yeah, so I'm here to talk about some camera techniques that I use when I have the Titan. When the Titan came around, I really, really enjoyed all of the options that it gave. And I also really liked the image quality. The first thing I'm going to talk about is when I film with the Titan for pre-production. Pre-production, and this also sort of flows into post as well. So when you film with the Titan, Michael was already saying that you need to use these 64 gig, the SanDisk Extreme Pro 3s with the V30. With the Titan, it's 9 cards. And you can imagine how much time it's going to take for you to go and switch one card, one card, one card, one card. It takes a long time. So what we have is we have these USB 3.1 card readers. We went ahead and bought 9 of them, and they all slide in to a slot like this. This is a USB 3.1. It's a 10 card reader. These are all quite fast. And this is just, again, from Amazon Basics. It's quite simple to get, but it can really, really speed up your upload and download time, just in terms of data transfer. It's so much faster. It's so much easier. And we also use an app, like a USB card reader that we can use to go ahead and label these files and just get them downloading and labeled as fast as possible. I love this. I love it. I love it. It's so fast. And I love working with it with the Titan. It just makes everything work. It makes it more seamless, and I highly recommend it.
Hey, Jenna, just jumping in here, this is really great insight. And just to clarify Jenna's point, we Insta360, we have a kit, and you can purchase that kit, and you will it'll have that card reader in it. And I think the card reader that Jenna was talking about is they went out and purchased a third-party aftermarket card reader that will give you even faster download speed. So there's a lot of solutions out there for you.
Yeah, exactly. So tons of options, but either way, it's really, really good when you have 9 cards to deal with, to find a way to get it to download and transfer faster. In addition to the cards, we also I'm also going to talk a little bit about the production. The Insta has, as Michael was saying, a pretty easy to use where's my iPad? A pretty easy to use interface. What I use mostly when I'm actually looking for the exposures is the histogram. Again, you're using an iPad, and the weather may be, it may be a nice indoor setting, or you may be, for example, like I would be in Dubai and it would be a really, really sunny day. And so I really rely on that histogram, and I love that it's there for me to use. So when I go ahead and start working with ISO and shutter speed and white balance, I can see where my levels are with that histogram. So when you're using this app, definitely go ahead and turn that on. It's if you click on the image, the histogram button will show up sort of on the bottom left of the screen. And then when it shows up, it'll be right there as I've labeled. Yeah, thank you. And then another thing that I'd like to say that I love that the Titan app has right now is templates. Again, when you're filming quite fast, it's really great to go ahead and set up some templates. When we were filming our road trip cross country, I had actually different templates set up for sunny days and rainy days and evenings. I would still have to go in and customize them, but it was really great. When you're connecting the camera really fast and you see a really great shot and the sun looks perfect, to go ahead and have that template set up. So all you have to do is go to the bottom right-hand corner, click on it, use it. It's wonderful. So again, I have a small sort of example of how you set that template up. You can set most of the camera settings on it, and then it's just there for you, and it's labeled whatever you'd like to do it. I would actually like to go back and mention one more thing about pre-production that I believe I did not mention before. When I am using the card readers and I'm putting the cards in for the first time, another really great tip, the files have to be loaded with sort of like a ProSlick file, or I call it a ProSlick file. It can take a few minutes to load, so always make sure that you have that file loaded on before you'd like to begin filming. That can be anything from turning on the camera and you know, as the first thing you do is get that file reading, or get the camera to start reading the cards and make sure they're good. Or if you really are out of time and you really don't think when you turn on the camera you're not going to have time, go ahead and preload the cards with the file on them before you begin filming. It can really save you time, and it's something that I found to be really valuable as well. But yeah, so I think those are my sort of 3 tips. Utilize those templates, use the histogram, and definitely take advantage of the multiple card readers and the files that can go onto them.
That's amazing, Jenna. Thank you. I don't come from a traditional background like you and Mark, and I think that the histogram tip is really helpful for me. I'm going to start using it every time I record.
Just a quick note about post production, and I mean, you know, here I'm just talking about the Titan, you know, and it's working with it. And the 2 biggest things that did impress me about the Titan, and I'm a huge fan, has been the color depth, you know, being 10-bit, and when we were driving across country, it does make a big difference, particularly at those sunrise sunset shots. And the other thing is that that 180 megabit per second, to me, is huge. And this is the classic shot where you would really see that difference in a Titan shot, you know, versus other cameras. It's a very complex image, and so any extra bit rate that you have is going to allow that to have less compression in it, and so it's really made a huge difference in it. The one thing about you know, filming with a higher bit rate is that you are going to have larger files. So, you know, as Michael was saying earlier, it's important for you, and this is my post tip and also my production tip, is to go ahead and invest in high-speed data transfers. You know, SSD drives when you're on the road, make sure you're using USB 3. You know, if at all possible. I mean, we've got portable RAIDs actually that, you know, that we're using and have worked that through on the road. And then another big thing that we did recently was we converted the office over to 10 gig Ethernet. And so when we're moving around, we've got, you know, a bunch of machines and a big 10G NAS. But when we're moving around all these big files and getting them off the server or working from the server, it's an investment. But if you're still working on a one gig network, you'll find that it's well worth the cost to get a 10G network up and running. So that's sort of my post tips and tricks and production. And Michael, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Let me just take back control. If you don't mind sticking around, we had a couple of great questions come in from the audience, and I was hoping we could pick your brain for a couple minutes more. So the first question is, it came in from one of our users and asked about what kind of tricks you can utilize to control viewer attention in a 360 experience. Obviously, we're not cutting shots the same way that we would with a traditional film project. So what can you do to direct the viewer more?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that that you think about differently when you are directing. I mean, I direct conventional 2D at times, but mostly 360 these days, and I work with it differently. Directing the viewer is number one is audio, and you were talking about audio earlier, and I wanted to loop back on that. We do use the an Ambio, and actually my Ambio is down at the office. But we've got an Ambio, and this is an F8, Zoom F8, and it all goes into that. And we use lavalier mics. I've got a couple of those here. So we get audio from not just one, not just the ambisonic, but also lav mics, and then we go and map that, and we do ambisonic audio. And ambisonic audio is audio that is spatially based, so that if somebody is talking, over to the left, you'll hear them in your left ear principally, or in your right ear if you turn. So audio is critical for controlling, viewer attention. The other thing when I'm working with actors is that I use blocking a lot, and I think more about blocking, and I try to get, I may have a background extra in there, and sometimes I may think that people are going to be watching the main actors, but if I really need them to be looking in a particular point, I'll have a background extra that does something, if over in this side of the space, but then they start walking towards the actors. So I'll use that subconscious movement to draw people back, because people will tend to follow, if somebody's walking through the scene, they'll follow them. And then that extra, if it's I did one in a store, and that extra will then sort of fade out of the scene, so to speak. But it'll those type of movement, type of thing. So audio and movement are your two biggest ones, and then as opposed to, we don't have close-ups, but you can get some of that feel of close-ups by moving people in and out of the in towards and away from the camera. So there are times when we will do that type of a thing, in like Mind of a Teenage Shooter or something, where we'll have a little bit of action back here, but then to enhance the feel of it, I'll have the actors moving into the camera a little bit. The action, if there's an argument going on or something like that, just like we normally cut to a close-up, I'll bring them in a little bit and get them to move in during the shot.
It's a whole new way of thinking about how you're capturing at the production level, and I've heard it described as a new challenge that's super exciting from a directorial standpoint, and I've heard it described in other ways too. But these are really cool tips and tricks, Mark, and thank you for sharing that. I think folks are going to go start practicing what you just described at home. The next question, and I only got a couple more for you, and then we'll let you go. But there was a lot of question from different people about the best lighting techniques, and also how to minimize noise in dark areas.
And that's where that 10-bit really helps. As far as that goes, you can, if you can bring in additional light, and then you're going to be painting it out later, then yes, you bring in additional light. A lot of times we'll hide light. We will bounce lights around from behind things. It gets a little strange because you start getting brightness on the walls, but sometimes that's easier than actually putting so it's a lot of fill light. But yeah, it is a challenge in that a lot of times you really are having to, in a lot of settings, you're dealing with natural light. Personally, we tend to use log space, and the log shooting modes judiciously. But you can go into the log modes, in those low lights, and that is going to help you. You're going to have more time in post if you shoot in log, but that's a much longer discussion about how you approach, log shooting. But log is basically, for those that aren't aware of it, it's basically a filming mode that sort of boosts your black levels up, and it compresses your whole picture. And then in post, you do color correction on that. But what that allows you to do is have a little bit less noise, a little bit more color range down in those shadow areas.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And for anybody that does prefer to shoot in log, all of Insta360's cameras, whether it's a consumer camera or professional cinema camera, you can record in log profile for all of them. We think it's super important.
Yeah, and I mean, and that, for the particularly for those shots, a lot of times, because there's an overhead with log, and there's issues with 8-bit log, but on a Titan, it's really handy. All of our sunrise sunset shots, we tended to flip into log for that very reason.
That's great insight, and I have seen, just kind of a rule, a note for myself. I've seen a growing trend for these LED monopods that you can attach directly to your camera. So for those of you who don't have the luxury of painting out lights in post, or just want to get stuff done much quicker, you can look into this as a viable option.
Yeah. I mean, hiding light underneath the tripod is a classic thing, because you don't have to paint it out. LED panels are great, and a lot of times too, you can mount those in different places that you won't have a lot of roto to paint out. But the under the tripod lighting, we've kicked lights out from there before. Yeah.
The point is you get really creative in the VR world, and the BTS content is fascinating sometimes. Last question for you, Mark. I touched on this briefly, but I didn't want to steal too much of your thunder because I don't have nearly the background you do in the space. But can you just talk about some of the general benefits for using a 360 camera for VFX? And what are some tricks you can utilize on set to make the process easier in post?
Well, it actually just all in all became easier with these cameras. The way that I would do this in the late 90s, when I first started using HDR spherical imagery, was that you would go out and you would take a nodal, what's called a nodal ninja. It's basically a thing that sits on the top of your tripod. You put your camera on it, and you spin your camera around. You take a bunch of pictures, and you have real custom things that set up your bracketing range, the bracketing range you were talking about earlier. And the thing about that is, if you're on set, you've got 50 people and you're burning a lot of money, and they're all waiting for you, and they really don't want you to spend a lot of time. They want you to get in, get your shot and move on, so that they can break down and move to the next shot. So the nice thing about a 360 camera is that it makes that just so much faster. You can set up an automated bracket. You go in, you drop your camera, you have everybody hold for a second, and you set, you shoot that dynamic range picture. By the way, slate it. But it's kind of funny, but from experience, yeah, I've dropped into a couple of one day, and I didn't have my slate, and it was painful. Because basically, if you're ever on these type of shoots, on a TV, that was a TV series, the lighting may change. The guys may change the lighting, per take. They may be reversing the camera, so that they're filming some person this way, and then they're reversing the camera. The grips will come in, and basically electric will be changing lights on you, and so you thought you had a good reference frame for whatever 3D that you're doing later, and then you don't. So there's a lot of little things. Slate it by the shot so that you know, oh, that was the bright shot, the dark shot. And I guess going back to, some people may not realize what a lot of these the spherical shots are used for. And a lot of it tends to be when you are doing adding 3D objects in there. So basically, you're taking a lighting reference so that when you put the monster in, or the or the car in, or something like that, you're getting a visual reference of every light in that scene and its high dynamic range, so that tells you how bright the key is versus how bright any fills or natural light. What the color temperatures of the fill are. A lot of things like that, and that allows you to do much better and powerful 3D lighting. But people are starting to use it now for plates as well. I was telling you, I think the other day, about I was using it just last fall on a shot, where we had a 360 camera mounted onto the front of a car, and it was too dangerous to get this shot otherwise. But because we had it mounted on the front, we could do a lot of reframing with it. So it's it's not a 360 show that we're using it for, but we could actually use those plates as background plates outside the window for this big car crash scene. So there's a lot of advantages. Any of the VFX soups, probably can recognize them right away, and I think they're moving to things like a Titan to, and particularly the Titan because of the 10-bit, to capture those type of action plates.
It's remarkable, outside of just creating content for traditional VR or headsets. There's so many different applications that a 360 camera can be used for. And I just want to quickly thank Mark and Jenna again for joining us. I know you're both busy and taking time out of your days, and I think our audience really appreciates getting a chance to learn from you. And Mark, if anybody wants to collaborate on a project or pick your brain, how do they get in touch with you?
Reach out. Go to the VArtisans website, vartisans.com, and I think there's a contact page, on there. And yeah, we're particularly these days, we are doing post work too. We've got a pretty extensive post capability for a lot of this. I mean, not every shot turns out perfect. And so we're pretty good at fixing shots, but also adding things like the 3D objects and things like that. I mean, that goes back to my my animation background. So we're doing things with animated objects as well.
Yeah, and honestly, Mark, I've had a lot of time to check out your stuff, and I'm a big fan of what you do, and Insta360 really appreciates you as a user, and we can't wait to see what you guys are going to roll out next. I know I saw a glimpse of your on the road 360 dock, and it looked absolutely stunning. If you guys have a chance, please go check out some of Mark's work on VArtisans, and reach out if you have anything cool to share. Thanks again, Mark, and thanks again, Jenna.
Right. It's a pleasure.
So I'm also going to ask all of you to just stay on. We got a couple of more slides, and then we're going to get to our general Q&A and promo. But to the theme of being able to use your camera for all sorts of things that go for outside of just traditional filmmaking. I think Mark mentioned this, it was great that we talked about it, but a camera for VFX, this is a huge growing use case that we're seeing. We're seeing everybody from folks that are working on commercials to film and TV projects, big budget movies, and even social creators at home who are using this camera to create amazing VR content. And there are a couple of creators online. If you are creating social content, I'd recommend you check out at Cash Bunny on Instagram. She does some really great stuff with our handheld cameras in VFX. Live streaming is an amazing use case that's growing, especially today where everybody's working and trying to communicate remotely. We're seeing a huge growth in VR live streaming. Now, if you are interested in this, we have a separate webinar on VR live streaming, and it's free. I'd recommend you check it out. If you can find it online, just search for the first Insta360 webinar. Virtual tours, I think this kind of goes hand in hand with working remotely. You know, I would say real estate is the biggest user of virtual tours right now, but you see a lot of hospitality brands, hotels and restaurants and public parks and all sorts of organizations are now creating virtual tours. You're seeing universities and other student organizations doing campus tours. So, and I'm sure you've all seen a virtual tour at some point now. And there's some other examples. I mean, the list goes on and on. I could talk to you guys about this for a while. Insta360, our professional cameras, are the official third-party Street View cameras for Google. So if you pick one of these up, you can go and help Google map the rest of the world, and you can partner with some tourism organizations to get paid for your work. So it's a really great opportunity. Road inspection and maintenance, location scouting, and VR training and recruitment, these are all also additional valuable tools. With remote learning now being popular in schools, VR is more popular than ever, and there's all sorts of organizations and institutes that are looking at onboarding a VR camera in order to help educate students during this time. So if you're looking to monetize with a 360 camera, there's a lot of ways that you can do it, not just by creating traditional films, VR films. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. If you have a cool project that you're working on, as with last time, please email and share it to us. We're always looking to support outstanding projects, and we're going to select one of your works. Now I want to get to the final part. We have some really great general Q&A that came in from you guys. We can't get to all the questions because we're running a little bit low on time, but I did want to address some of the most popular ones that came in. There's a question that was asked about VR 180. Should I get into 180? Is it a more popular medium than 360? Just in general, explaining 180. So just one quick note. In general, if you have an Insta360 Pro 2 or a Titan, you can use it to export 180. So if you're shooting the full 360, you can export 180 from any of the 4 camera sensors. So it's essentially like you have a 180 and a 360 camera together. In terms of when do you create 180 content and when do you create 360 content, that's really up to you. I mean, you have to look at each project and evaluate what makes the most sense. If for 180, I do know that YouTube and Oculus are really pushing it right now in their platforms as a way of entertainment and also education. So there are different applications for when you should create 180 and 360. And I think if you look on Oculus's website, they have some good case studies for that. Another question came in. Let's see. What type of camera would be best to create VR for a product like a printer or a computer? So to me, this sounds like commercial work. So my recommendation is for anytime you're going to be creating projects and commercial work for a client, for deliverables, you always want to create content at the highest quality. While something like the 1R will be easy to use and you can edit your content quicker, I would still recommend going for something more premium like the Pro 2 or the Titan. Starting with the Pro 2 is probably a good choice. If you decide later that you want to bump up the resolution even more, or you want more bit depth, or whatever reason that you want to upgrade your camera, you can always upgrade to the Titan later. But Pro 2 is a really great place to start. Another question came in about the future of VR filmmaking. Where is it heading? How quickly can we see 360 videos being the new norm of video? Well, if it was up to Insta360, it would be very quick. But in all seriousness, there is a huge growing trend in VR. You can see some really great VR films coming out. Some of the major film festivals like South by Southwest and Cannes and Sundance, they all have VR components now. A lot of companies are coming in and setting up VR, fully immersive experiential experiences that you can go in and it's essentially taking 360 and adding a 4th dimension onto it, whether it's smell or color or having you actually move through an experience. So there's a lot of ways that VR is getting going out there to the main world. Um, and again, you know, cameras are getting easier to use. They're getting more powerful. They're getting more affordable. And with those three things, we're seeing an uptick in the amount of people who are using them. 4 years ago, I never would have imagined myself with a VR camera, but because it's so easy to use now, I'm shooting 360 content constantly. Can you use an Insta360 Pro for real estate photography or VR tours? And how do you fix the exposure problem? So I think what you're asking here is, well, very simple answer, yes, you can use a 360 camera, and there's some really great softwares that are compatible with it, like Kula and other virtual tour softwares. You can just Google them. We have compatibility with a ton. And what you do is you shoot your footage, you stitch it and edit it in the virtual tour software company, and then you can post it to wherever you need. So yes, you can. Simple answer. And to fix the exposure problem, Pro 2 shoots HDR. So for indoor photos, you're not going to get overblown windows or too much exposure. And also, you know, if the Pro 2 is still not enough for indoor for exposure problems, then look at the Titan, because the Titan will have the micro four thirds sensors. The Titan will record at higher bit rate, and it'll the image will be higher resolution. So there's tools out there. It really just depends on the type of job that you're doing. That's it for today's questions. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to Insta360's second webinar. We're going to be doing more and more of these. If you have suggestions for topics that you think we should cover, please send them in. If there are things that you liked about this webinar and there are things that you didn't like about it, let us know as well. We're always looking to make improvements. And if you'd like specific guests or featured, please let us know as well. And thank you again. Again, I'm Michael from Insta360, and I hope to see you guys for the next webinar. Have a nice day.